Good Monday evening to you. For Telesu, my name is Reagan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with a look at the headlines. Talks on a regional response to climate change. The Second World People's Conference wraps up in Bolivia. We recognize Indigenous Resistance Day in Chile as demonstrators march against the state and capitalism. And will a Palestinian intifada come to pass? An update from the Middle East and more. Now on From the South. Thank you for being here with us. The Second World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Defense of Life has ended in Cochabamba, Bolivia. The meeting's conclusions will be taken to the United Nations Climate Change Conference to be held in Paris at the end of November. The summit was closed with festivities, but also a serious message that there must be a radical shift in thinking to reverse the negative effects of pollution, carbon emissions, and many other environment-harming actions. The summit calls for a new model of civilization with less consumption and without capitalism, and one that promotes the rights of peoples in harmony with nature. In the morning, the more than 7,000 participants heard the conclusions of the 12 working groups that met over the weekend. One of these groups, on good living versus capitalism, called for an end to the pursuit of unfettered growth.
Las acciones de los pueblos para fortalecer el buen vivir o vivir bien tiene que ser compromiso de todos los que estamos aquí.
Actions by the peoples of the world to strengthen good living has to be a commitment for all of us here, working with communities of Afro-descendants and social movements internationally. We have to build worldwide awareness that our task is to guarantee the survival of future generations. We need to continue to fight in all the political and bilateral spaces we can to put a brake on the accumulation of capital, the overproduction of commodities, irresponsible consumerism, violence against our communities, and the patriarchal system. We need to demand clear policies from our government, policies that are in line with summa causal and good living.
Exigir a nuestros gobiernos políticas públicas claras, coherentes, dentro del summa causal.
Working Group 4 on the Rights of Mother Nature condemned irresponsible mining and oil extraction in many parts of Latin America.
La irresponsabilidad de las empresas multinacionales con respecto al caso de la hermana República Argentina.
We reject the responsible behavior of multinational corporations, like in Argentina, where the Canadian company Verigold spilled 1 million liters of cyanide in San Juan province, causing irreparable damage to Mother Nature and the death of the people living there. We demand justice for the oil disaster caused by Texaco and Chevron in the Amazon region of Ecuador. We condemn the contamination of mercury spills in the mining company of Yanacocha and Peru.
Condenamos la contaminación ambiental por el derrame de mercurio generada por la empresa minera Yanacocha en el departamento de Cajamarca en la República.
Working Group 5 dealt with the use of knowledge and technology to protect life.
Acciones de los pueblos para fortalecer los conocimientos.
We need action to strengthen people's knowledge, techniques, and technologies in relation to climate change and in defense of life. We need to demand access to socially appropriate science and technology as a human right recognized by the United Nations. And we need a new international mechanism to manage access to science and technology and its benefits in order to defend human life.
And the 6th Working Group on Defending Shared Knowledge demanded measures to prevent ancestral knowledge and ecosystems from being turned into commodities.
Fortalecer las tradiciones de nuestros pueblos y sus saberes como parte del patrimonio.
We want to strengthen the traditions and ancestral knowledge of our peoples as a legacy for humanity, promoting dialogue between cultures to achieve good living, or buen vivir. We want measures to protect biodiversity and restore ecosystems that are under threat from a corporate, multinational offensive that seeks to appropriate and modify these common goods in order to turn them into commodities.
Que busca apropiarse, manipular y modificar el patrimonio.
Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro also attended the closing session of the People's Summit, where he was received by Bolivia's foreign minister. On his arrival, Maduro called for the peoples of Latin America and the South to take a strong and united message to the United Nations Climate Summit in Paris.
Powerful movements of indigenous people, of professionals, women and young people are taking up the environment and eco-socialism as a vital need for humanity. Only by strengthening our capacity for joint action with a shared program, unified proposals, will we be able to develop an international public opinion that understands the damage inflicted by capitalism on our planet. We need a single voice, the voice of the people.
And Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa was also in Cochabamba. He called for environmental justice so that those responsible for damaging the planet should be held accountable.
The problems of the destruction of nature, the emissions of greenhouse gases, climate change, could all be solved by that wonderful word, justice. Environmental justice, in this case. We are all responsible, but in different ways. Some have much more responsibility for the damage inflicted to the planet, and those countries should pay for that damage. They should pay their ecological debt with Bolivia, with Ecuador, Venezuela, with the entire world.
Also, representatives from Venezuela brought ideas of self-management and responsible extraction to the conference.
We have brought a proposal for discussion at the Good Living Workshop, which is something we've been working on in Venezuela with the new self-managed communities. It involves men and women being able to build their own homes, produce their own food and clothes, while respecting the environment. We have to get back to this principle of people managing their own lives in order to live well.
We have come with a range of proposals, things we have been working on with other eco-socialist movements in Venezuela. At the heart of these proposals is the responsibility of capitalism. As an economic model based on extracting natural resources, based on producing more and more, which is what has been damaging Mother Earth and producing climate change.
During the conference, members of the Chilean delegation asked President Michelle Bachelet to keep her word about negotiating Bolivia's access to the Pacific Ocean.
Of the 15 or 12 points of Mrs. Bachelet's agenda, the 6 directly points of this maritime issue. Then, a big amount of Chilean organizations are demanding the Chilean government to keep to its word. And that's why a huge amount of labor, population, intellectual and professional organizations are doing activities permanently. What happens in Chile, and you as members of the press know better than us, is that 99.9% of the press is controlled by the big national and international monopolies.
The close of the climate summit in Bolivia coincides with the Day of Indigenous Resistance, celebrated across the Americas. In Chile, what began as a peaceful demonstration in Santiago, led by the Mapuche community, ended up in clashes with the police. The Mapuches were demanding the demilitarization of historic lands in La Araucanía and the release of prisoners they claim are held for political reasons. Other groups joined the protests, including students, the Movement for Homosexual Integration and Liberation, and workers' unions. Some of the protesters covered their faces and started throwing objects at the police, who dispersed the crowd with water cannons and tear gas. And in Paraguay, the indigenous movement protested at the Congress to demand an indigenous funds law. Its leaders explained that the bill would include a fund managed by the National Indigenous Institute through a management board to be created to that end. The Aboriginal people organizations also recalled the Spanish invasion and reiterated their demand for the restitution of their ancestral lands. And in Caracas, Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro unveiled a statue honoring the leader of the rebellion against the Spanish Empire, Guaicaipuro. He did so before heading to Bolivia. He was accompanied by the First Lady, Celia Flores, and members of the government, as well as several representatives of the indigenous community. Maduro remembered Commander Hugo Chávez's fight to acknowledge the indigenous peoples and called to preserve the indigenous values to arm a new society. Brazil's main opposition groups have publicly requested the resignation of the Speaker of the lower house, Eduardo Cunha. This adds to a previous demand made by a group of leftist lawmakers supporters of President Dilma Rousseff. Cunha has been under investigation for months for allegedly having benefited from the Petrobras corruption scheme. He was accused by a jailed former consultant at the oil firm for demanding a $5 million bribe to push through contracts and left the government coalition in July despite denying his involvement. The Speaker has the power to allow impeachment proceedings against Rousseff. And staying in Brazil, coffins lined Rio de Janeiro's famous Copacabana beach to bring attention to the violence in the city. Over 4,000 people have been killed in the state of Rio de Janeiro this year alone. The founder of Rio in Peace, Antonio Carlos da Costa, said a city preparing to host the international community for the 2016 Rio Olympics should not have so many violent deaths. The death toll in Guatemala's landslide that earlier this month devastated the El Cambre village near the capital has risen to 273, with 267 people still missing. Volunteers and the Guatemalan army are still working frantically in the search and to get essentials to families affected by the landslide. Also, local medical authorities have warned of the threat of the spread of disease. It is estimated that 90 houses were buried. Authorities believe the disaster could have been avoided as the zone had been declared at risk on 2 occasions. We now go to Mexico, where the Army must deliver all its communications held with the United States government regarding the disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students. The Mexican Institute of Transparency and Access to Information has ordered the National Defense Secretary to search and deliver all the documents containing any information about the communication held with the government of the United States in relation to the disappearance of the 43 students and the death of 6 people in September last year. On the other hand, the Attorney General has published the official version of the investigation. 14 private U.S. planes landed in Cuba over the weekend for the first time in decades. The planes landed at the Varadero Beach Resort is another sign of the normalization of relations between the two countries. At the end of September, Cuban and United States representatives gathered to talk about the normalization of commercial air services. And joining us now live from Cochabamba, we have Dimitri O'Donnell to give us the perspective of what's been happening there in Bolivia as pertains to climate change talks. Hi Dimitri, how are you doing? Firstly, can you tell us the final conclusions of the conference?
So one of the main conclusions so far, that after the 3rd day of meeting here in Cochabamba, is all 3 presidents attacked capitalism as being the main cause of climate change. And as a result, they said something serious needs to be done to avoid climate change going forward over the next couple of years. One main solution is to establish an international environmental court that would look specifically at environmental issues and that would punish those governments that are reckless when it comes to the environment, that don't take the reduction of greenhouse gases seriously. But this idea has long been mooted by Bolivia and by developing nations. And the problem is that every country that that's going to the Paris summit in late November, early December, is fundamentally opposed to this idea. And this is the biggest problem that these countries, these developing countries, are facing, to persuade the Western nations that they must act now to stop global climate change. The other problem is, of course, that the European Union, which has long been advocating for stricter measures when it comes to environmental pollution, they now are saying that it's better to adopt a pledge and review system that would simply look at how the developed nations are doing when it comes to reducing greenhouse gases, by reducing them by 50% by 2050. And this has been fundamentally panned here at the conference as well.
That's a great idea, that international court, but of course we know how little Western nations respect international courts. The concept of buen vivir, or good living, has been mentioned quite a bit in the conference as an alternative way of thinking about the world. Could you explain this for us, Dimitri?
Well, a lot of these people that you see behind me here are a proponent of that idea. They want a more sustainable environment. They're looking for the Western governments to take climate change more seriously. And one word that's been universally used right across these 3 days here in Cochabamba is the idea of Pachamama, of taking care of Mother Earth. And this is the whole idea of this conference, to give the people that are most affected by climate change a voice when it comes to the Paris summit. They want people to be aware in Western nations that the effects that these large amounts of greenhouse gas emissions are having on their lives. We heard Ban Ki-moon speaking on Saturday about the fact that a famous mountain here in Bolivia used to be covered in snow all year round, and now it's only got snow for just a few weeks of the year. This is just one idea of how the effects of climate change is having on local people, on local lives in the developing world. And they say that the time is running out to actually take the initiative to make a real change and to help them basically go forward and continue with their lives in a sustainable way. They want their children to live in the same environment that they grew up in, and that's not going to happen, they say, unless these developed nations take action now. And that is the main message going forward to the Paris summit. People power. That's what Nicolas Maduro said, Venezuela's president. People power must send the message to these nations that they must act now.
Definitely, and of course it's good that it's happening in Bolivia, as they were lauded by Ban Ki-moon for having come up, Bolivia that is, having come up with an International Day for Mother Earth. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for your report. We'll touch base another time. And coming up after the break, thousands attended the funerals of those killed by suicide bomb attacks in Turkey over the weekend. That story and more next.
The world is divided among continents and nations. Nations are divided by borders and interests. These interests divide the news. We examine the impact of these divisions on people and power. This is Imaginary Lines. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. A world infinitely connected. Millions of people instantaneously interacting. Experiences relayed in 144 characters. Millions of lives in every corner of the planet. They're not tweets, they're stories. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there. Rod stars G1 and Claudia de la Cruz are Rebel Diaz, hip-hop activists positioned within a history of political resistance through music. And you don't stop. They invite young people to express themselves about their social struggles. And you don't stop. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
The violence in and around Jerusalem is escalating. Several scuffles between Israeli police and Palestinians as recently as this Monday have been occurring. An 18-year-old Palestinian man was shot dead by security forces after he tried to stab a police officer. And later, 2 separate attacks on Israelis were recorded. The assailants shot and wounded. The seeming reprisals by Palestinians against Israeli authorities have many concerned that an intifada will ensue. And Palestinian factions claim that they do not seek an escalation of violence with Israel, despite clashes flaring up in Jerusalem. We have more now with Noor Harazim.
The Israeli occupation forces shot dead 2 Palestinian children under the age of 13 Monday morning near the Lions Gate in East Jerusalem, claiming they were hiding a knife in their pockets. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Ministry of Health announced that the death toll since the start of October reached 25 Palestinians, 14 in the West Bank and 11 in the Gaza Strip, with more than 1,300 injuries. 3 weeks of violence in Jerusalem and the West Bank have drawn hundreds of youth within the 1948 occupied territories and the Gaza Strip, raising fears that the unrest could develop to a full-scale uprising.
The situation in Jerusalem will not return as it was before after this uprising. The uprising was a cry for all the Palestinian people that they can no longer tolerate the occupation settlements, brutality, harassment of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and other violations, including its practices against our prisoners, our people, and our land. This continuously escalating uprising has different forms. It is developing towards a third intifada, despite the troubles that hinder it.
On the other hand, President of the Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas instructed his security forces to take measures to restore calm, while Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused the Palestinian Authority of inciting the protesters and ordered the reinforcement of extra police troops in Jerusalem. Political analysts and observers say that although Israel hopes to drive the world's attention away from the escalation in Jerusalem by raising up tensions in Gaza, the Palestinian factions, including Hamas, do not seek any escalation of violence with the occupation state. Noor Harazim, Telesu TV, Gaza.
Massive crowds attended the funeral services of the dozens who died on Saturday during a peace rally by pro-Kurdish and leftist activists at the hands of suicide bombers. Thousands also had party flags and screamed anti-government slogans during the processions in the Turkish city of Tunceli and the town of Sorok. Turkey's government said that the over 90 people who died in the attack may have done so at the hands of Islamic State. Citing a lack of infinite resources, London's Metropolitan Police Force will be calling off its ground guards outside the Ecuadorian embassy. The guards had been placed there to arrest WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange in the event that he stepped outside the compound in which he had been granted asylum since 2012. The Metropolitan Police Force cited that over $19 million has been spent on guards to watch the embassy over the years. Their plan is to now use covert and overt tactics to arrest him. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has instructed an investigation into a recent incident involving Taliban forces after a NATO helicopter crashed after an attack by a suicide bomber, killing all 5 troops on board. A fact-finding mission has been formed to determine what happened and who is responsible. The Syria-Russia alliance has further attacked Islamic State targets in Syria. The country's army claimed they have recaptured several villages in the northern part of the central province of Hama. At the same time, at least 30 Russian airstrikes have hit targets in the town of Kafr Nabuda. Syrian high-ranking officials say that many terrorists have been killed in the advances, with the Russian Air Force providing Syrian ground forces with air fire cover. More now with Telesu's Hazem Abdullah in Syria.
The Syrian army has made rapid advance against armed groups with the supporting of Russian air cover. The army's spokesman says there has been progress on 3 fronts in the province of Latakia, Idlib and Hama, and that the ground operation has restored control of several towns, destroying a large number of weapons stores and terrorist convoys.
We are with the Syrian Arab army and look at each new victory at the beginning of the end of this tragedy. We will inevitably win against terror, thanks to our wise leadership and these brave people.
In general, people are very optimistic. What we really want is the return of safety for every Syrian, and this is what we see daily achieved during the Syrian Arab Army's advances.
The official spokesman for the Russian Defense Ministry, Igor Konashenkov, said that Russian warplanes carried out 55 flights and bombed 3 ISIS terrorist sites in Syria. He added that the Russian air and space reconnaissance in continuing to identify new targets and infrastructure for ISIS terrorists on Syrian territory in order to destroy them later.
The ground operation has heavy Russian and Syrian air cover, with missile support as well, in order to cut off all supply routes used by the terrorists to bring arms towards the towns and the rural areas of Hama and Idlib. This is a prelude to bigger ground operations in the southern province of Idlib. And today, we have seen the beginning of the liberation of several towns in that area.
In parallel with that military operation, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed the need to launch a political process in Syria soon. The prospect of linking international efforts in the fight against terrorism is being discussed at a joint meeting with Secretary General of Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Lim Partok Safer, in Moscow this Monday. Hazim Abdullah, Telesur, Syria.
And now a brief look at other stories making news around the world.
Hervé Falcini, the French-Italian national responsible for leaking documents that claim the HSBC bank helped clients evade millions of dollars in taxes, did not show up for trial on Monday. The head prosecutor of the case demanded that Falcini be present in Switzerland for the trial, prompting a postponement by the judge November the 2nd. The UNHCR's High Commissioner Antonio Guterres is adamant that Greece must not face the refugee influx alone. He said this during a 3-day meeting in Greece, where he added that the reallocation of refugees cannot take a technocratic approach. Guterres said refugee interests must be taken into account. He also made mention of the ongoing war in Syria, which contributes to the most refugees in the crisis.
All the countries that are providing the parties of the conflict with support, with money or with weapons, to understand that now this became a nightmare. This became a threat to everybody. This became a threat to global peace and security.
Dozens of people were killed in suicide bomb attacks in Cameroon and Nigeria over the weekend, with many more injured. The attacks are being blamed on a militant terrorist group, Boko Haram. Reports are that the group proclaimed an Islamic emirate in neighbouring northeastern Nigeria, enforcing a brutal interpretation of Islamic law. And Scottish-born Angus Deaton has won this year's Nobel Prize in Economics. The academic is best known for his work on health, well-being and economic development. According to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, Deaton's research has helped transform the fields of microeconomics, macroeconomics and development economics.
I never thought it was a very likely.
Sepp Blatter refuses to give up or admit defeat despite being banned from FIFA for 90 days on October 8th. Swiss authorities are investigating the FIFA president over the sale of television rights in 2005, as well as a 2011 payment of over $1 million to FIFA Vice President Michel Platini. Blatter has refuted all allegations of wrongdoing and filed an appeal on Friday. His appeal process began earlier today. Bolivia celebrated its annual Day of the Woman on Saturday with a bicycle race. But there are no tights or helmets here. The women who took part raced in traditional indigenous skirts and bowler hats. About 150 women rode the 4.3-mile event in Bolivia's second largest city, El Alto. Participants said that they wanted to demonstrate that sport is for everyone, including women, as well as the challenges faced and the courage displayed by today's Bolivian women.
We want to demonstrate that sport is for everyone. We want to demonstrate the courage of these women. It is not easy to ride a bike in a traditional bolera skirt. It gets stuck in the tires, in the chains, in the pedals. This is why we want to show that there are no limits to doing sport. And here are our women who wear the traditional skirt and are so brave in demonstrating that.
And finally, this evening, several events in Havana have been commemorating the 500th anniversary of the founding of Cuba's capital. A 2-hour outdoor concert took place on Friday night in the Cathedral Square. Performing were Chinese pianist Lang Lang and the acclaimed Cuban pianist Chucho Valdez, together with the Cuban orchestra. They played pieces by Cuban composers and other composers from Russia, the United Kingdom and the United States. And please remember, there is more on these and other stories on our website, telesurotv.net/English. From our news teams here in Quito, Ecuador, and right here in Caracas, Venezuela, my name is Regan Devines. Have a great evening. We hope you can join us tomorrow.